Okay, welcome everybody. This is Birch Bark's In Conversation evening and event with Jill McCorkle and Erica. Oh my gosh, Erica, forgive me if I pronounce your name incorrectly. Erica Plouffe Lazure, is that correct? Did I do it? I did it. Of course I did it. We're going to ask everyone to remain muted, although we do ask you, if you have questions, to please post them in the chat. And that way, when we hit the question and answer period for this event, we'll come back to your questions and we can certainly ask Jill and Erica about them. Before we get started, I just want to point out a few really great things that are happening with Birch Bark Editing. With my partner, Max Fraser. We have started a relatively new publication. It's called Microlit Almanac. Go ahead and take a look at it. We've been publishing flash fiction, Ukraine bulletins, and we've been doing Baudelaire's poems from Baudelaire's The Flowers of Evil, which has been really interesting. We didn't really think it through that it was going to be Poetry Month, but there you have it. Next Tuesday, we have a mix and meet workshop. If you're interested, please come back to our website and check for that. We're also offering a micros and more class, which is sort of a look at the elements of flash fiction. And there's still space in that class. And our next event, which is in, what's next month? May, will be with June Gervais and Shauna K. Rodenberg. They'll both be talking about their books. So please check back with us and join us for those two events. Moving on, I am thrilled, absolutely thrilled to be presenting two of my very favorite people, Jill McCorkle and Erica. Jill McCorkle, as many of you know, is her first two novels were released simultaneously when she was just out of college. And the New York Times called her a born novelist. Since then, many, many novels and 4 collections of short stories. Her work has been anthologized, and she's received numerous awards: New England Booksellers Award, John Dos Passos, a prize for excellence in literature, and the North Carolina Award for Literature. She was a Briggs Copeland Lecturer in Fiction at Harvard, and she is currently a faculty member at Bennington, and she's affiliated with the MFA program at North Carolina State University. Erica is the author of 3 chapbooks, Sugar Mountain, Heard Around Town, and Dry Dock, and her debut story collection, which we will be hearing from tonight, received the New American Fiction Prize. She is a former newspaper reporter who now writes, teaches English, plays music, and draws in Exeter, New Hampshire. If you have not seen Erica's drawings, you really should check them out. I would buy one of those drawings if she would sell it to me. So Jill is going to be reading from her novel Hieroglyphics, and Erica will be reading from Proof of Me. Take it away, Jill and Erica.
Okay, so are we going in that order, or what do you think?
Oh, Jill, I think you should go first, or however it works. Yeah.
I am fine with that, and I hope I just heard a ding sort of come from my end. I hope I didn't mess up here, but overlook the ding, because now I'm afraid to turn it off. I'm afraid I'll get booted from the Zoom room, which I have done before. So anyway, I'm reading from my novel Hieroglyphics. This novel has 4 point of view characters, and I thought I would just maybe read a sampling. Well, I'll read something from the very beginning, and then a tiny bit of another character if time allows. Let's see. Sorry, guys, I should have been better. Here. This is a character named Lil, a woman in her 80s, basically going over her life, taking the time to, basically she's editing what she does and does not want her children to to know. And so this is more or less addressed to her 2 children. We all are haunted by something we did or did not do, and the passing years either add to the weight or diminish it. Mine have diminished, perhaps because I've spent time thinking about it all. It might sound silly, but I see these bits and pieces as my contribution to evolution, the unearthing and dusting of the prints and markers that led me here. Some seem to bulldoze right through life and up to their headstones, but I want to take my time. I want to find the right words. I imagine my recipient to be you 2, or perhaps your children, and I hope this is so, rather than some stranger who comes in and hoists old boxes into a dumpster or rakes away the remainders of my life like the sad debris in the aftermath of a flood or fire. I'll never get over the sight of what we left behind at our home of over 50 years to move down here. A mountain of cast-off things, old towels and linens, papers and books and shoes and pots, side tables and lamps, hoses and hose, packets of seeds I meant to plant, and a rubber squeak toy that had been safely hidden away in the back of my closet by one of the dogs long dead. And so much more, things not needed, things long forgotten, cans of cream of whatever soup and V8 juice, why, and peas that had sat there forgotten for years, and things that never should have been there in the first place, like tuna helper, or those things in my closet, like that geometric print mini dress I bought in the 60s, hoping to look like Petula Clark or Judy Carn, a perky pixie kind of dress that I never had the nerve to wear, and instead looked at it there at the back of the closet for years, along with a wiglet and a long frosted fall and some jackets with shoulders resembling a football player or Victorian monarch. We divided it all into goodwill, consignment, recycle, or landfill. But there were also the things I couldn't let go of: letters, reminders, souvenirs, and I'm taking my time, relieved when I find something that might have gotten lost in that mountain of debris, like one of your drawings from first grade, or the stub from a movie I'd forgotten I even saw, or a note from my father. When the moving van pulled away that afternoon and we got in the car and turned southward, the space within seemed so empty, vacant. Our suitcases and silver chest in the trunk, an overnight bag and thermos of coffee on the back seat. And I had that terrible feeling that I had forgotten something, because I was thinking of all the times the car was filled with you 2, your belongings, your music and voices, the dogs, while going to school or on vacation or just to the grocery store, where I bought all of those things that I then put on the shelf there in our dimly lit pantry on the red gingham contact paper I spent one snowy afternoon 40 years ago cutting and sticking in place. All those things that I put there and then forgot about. In short, I am homesick and I am time sick. I would be lying not to say that. It's possible to feel content and resolved and still be homesick. I miss all that no longer is, which is why I paste and piece all these scraps together. Sometimes I hold a ticket or a photo, a piece of paper, while willing myself back to where I first held it. I know that might sound silly, but it's what I do. I want to hear your young voices, the dog scratching to come in. I want to call my father on the telephone, finger in that rotary dial, one number at a time, TW33642. Let me take this playbill and arrive at the theater, or this receipt and find myself there in the produce aisle of Star Market. Then after the show, after I check out, after I sit and let the car warm up, I drive those familiar streets home and find everything just as I left it, the kitchen door creaking behind me. And I think I'll stop with that. When I was thinking about the wonderful chance to get to read with Erica and spend time, geographically, we share so much space because we both have Eastern North Carolina. We both have time in New England. And I forgot to say at the beginning with my character, Lil, but after living her entire life in New England, she has retired in North Carolina, she and her husband, to be closer to their children. And I realized that after 20 years in New England myself, and my children grew up there, when I came back to North Carolina, which is where I had grown up, I had this terrible homesickness for this place that had once been so foreign to me and then had become my home and so much I loved. And so I think Erica probably shares that sensation of a foot in two very different places, two very different parts of the world, but we share that. And I just love seeing all those references in these wonderful stories. So I'm going to turn it over to Erica now.
Thank you so much, Jill. That was a wonderful reading, and yeah, I was really struck by the language of objects that you write about and keep returning to in this novel, which I'll ask you about later. But yeah, it's funny because I had never been a fiction writer until I moved to Eastern Carolina, and so even though I'm not Southern, I don't claim that at all. I do know that my literary roots are squarely set in Carolina, and yet I grew up in New England. I continue to live here, but yeah, those 8 years really were formative to me. I'd gone to graduate school for fiction, and we crossed paths at Bennington, but it was funny when I first started. Everyone was like, "Oh, you definitely need to be reading Jill McCorkle." Like that was like the first first stop, Jill McCorkle, and then of course I didn't quite listen to them right away, and I found myself listening to books, to what was it, Light in August by William Faulkner, driving around my car all around Eastern Carolina. So a little bit of a different experience there. Anyway, so my story collection is called Proof of Me. It's a set of, I think, 21 stories that are in 5 different sections, and some of them are clustered into stories about particular families, and all of them in some way or another connect to each other, whether you might see a character early on in one story that's going to show up in another story a little bit later on. And so you get a feel for the characters, not just through each story, but also through the place, because each of them in some way, even if they're living in New England or traveling through India or wherever they end up actually being, they are somehow tethered to my imagined, going back to Fowler, an imagined space of Mewborn, North Carolina, which I know is an actual crossing in Eastern Carolina, but it's not quite, it's not the crossing. But I liked the way that place sounded, and so it is my adopted fictional home. So I'm going to read the opening to a piece called The Duck Walk. And yeah, it'll give a feel for one of the families in this collection. So here it is. I am a known heretic in these parts because I mow the lawn on Sundays. I can feel my neighbor's eyes on my back on the Lord's Day as I maneuver through my special signature square in a square mow pattern, or when I take out the trash or clear brush from the swamp. I know they're watching, so for the hell of it, I'll sometimes go bare-chested, pot-bellied proud like my daddy. If I think of it, I'll up the throttle on the mower right when the neighbors drive by, and I slow and scowl at them, and they slow and scowl at me. And it's like I'm telling them with my eyes, mowing the lawn on Sundays is not a sin. And the look in their eyes says back, yes, it is. And today, the child's eyes are on me too. She's my sister Anna's kid, going on 5, Cassidy Penelope. It's classic Anna to pick for her child the longest, most complex name she could find. Why not just Cass, like our mama? It's also just like Anna to up and leave a situation that doesn't suit her, and then call one of us to go and comb it all out. Like leaving Cassidy Penelope on a friend's porch so she could go fight fires in Montana, then calling our sister Clara from a bus stop in West Kansas to ask if the child could come and live with us instead. You should have seen Clara when she got the call. She walked all the way from our house to the gas and sip, all ticked off in her house dress, looking like some sweat hog sister in orthopedic boots, with curlers ripped from her bangs. Anna told me Cass is my second chance, Clara said. She said, you raised me. Look how well I turned out. I could just kill her. It's not easy being the brother of these women. Ma always liked to say before she died that each of our fathers was as different as they make men, and she had the kids to prove it. We each turned out favoring our daddies. Clara all stern and round, me oil-stained hands, sandy brown all over with sideburns to boot, Anna red blonde and vixen trim and always on the take. Ma's age caught up with her after she had Anna, but even before she died, she'd always kept to Carla to look after us. And why Anna picked firefighting over child raising is beyond me. I know some women just aren't hardwired that way, and to be sure, Anna got the calamity gene from her daddy. Even when she was a baby, she'd explode at the slightest sign of something gone wrong. I can remember when she was 9, her little lungs blew out the eardrum of a classmate who joked about our mother going bald. Later, she and her best friend Dora would sneak out braless and suede skirts, taking backseat double dates with college boys. They'd give out names that matched their hair color, like noir and rouge. They'd come back late and fight on the front porch with Clara about sex laws and curfews. When Anna got pregnant, surprise, surprise, she'd use the phone and holler long-distance cuss words at her ex-boyfriend Kurt, who left for his station in Germany not long after they split. It was no surprise that Cassidy Penelope and her twin brother were born with screaming in their cells. I drove Clara to see Cassidy Penelope and Clay at the preemie ward a few days after they were born, and even then, Cass's mouth was all puckered, her fists clenched and moving like a little prize fighter under a cake tray. Clara claims Anna's anguish is what made them come 1 month early, and why Clay died 2 weeks later. Anger pipes through the umbilical cord. It shows in the milk, Clara had said, as we walked back from the burial in our backfield, right next to Mama. Some babies can't take it, Andy. That child was poisoned. Don't go looking to lay blame, I told her. Sid's my foot. Poor lamb. He'll watch over us now. Well, all I can say is, if Anna wants fires to fight, they got plenty here in Mewbourne, like that little time bomb impersonating a lemon on the porch. It's not enough to say she is a quiet child, because she's been here a week and hasn't talked yet. It's a strange kind of quiet, too. There's something in that cinch sack expression of hers that tells you she's taking in your every move, stockpiling it like a miser of information, or a little judge whose job it is to clutch an ugly stuffed duck. So it makes me wonder if she's noticed my square in a square pattern, if it impresses her how I hit every corner at a right angle, how I overlap the path by 3 inches, so when it's finished, the grain of the grass holds a striped pattern. But I don't see how she could miss any of my signature lawn moves because her eyes follow me with such precision. They look like they'll turn rectangular, and at one point I turn off the mower to tell her so. She was supposed to be at church, like the rest of Mewbourne. I'd planned to mow the lawn in peace, like I always do, and for a few hours not have to think about Clara, the gas and sip, the child, or her little puckered mouth. Clara had made a big deal this morning about getting Cassidy Penelope all ready for church. She'd found an old yellow apron dress from a closet somewhere, got her nails clipped, her face clean, pigtails, scrub sandals, all of it. Your big Red Banks Baptist debut, Clara kept saying. Cassidy Penelope did look like a real little mini beauty queen girl with all the flounces, the kind you'd actually take to church on a Sunday morning and expect everyone to fuss over afterwards. But when I reached out to scruff up her hair, I noticed how each strand looked like it was made of copper wire, like just like her mama's, just dying to get out from under the rubber bands and be free. So why didn't you go to church, baby girl? I asked her. Don't you want to learn how to be good? Good with God? Cassidy Penelope did not respond. I think she could sense that even I did not believe what I was saying. Even with the yellow dress and pigtails, even though Clara had given Cassidy Penelope her very own children's picture Bible, when we pulled up to Red Banks Baptist Church, the child refused to leave the car. She cinched up her mouth and shook her head from the back seat of the Crown Vic, her arms and legs folded up onto themselves, trapping the stuffed duck in the knots of her body like an angry pretzel in a yellow dress. The child would not go, and Clara did not insist. I can't take a stubborn child to church, Clara said. Not today. I'm on schedule to give the host. Well, what about saving her lost soul? I said, as Clara swung open the door and got out of the car, yanking the static from the ass end of her dress. Suffer the children? I told that child a whole string of knock-knock jokes all the way home, and she didn't laugh at a single one. Wouldn't even say, who's there? Okay.
So fabulous. I mean, you have got just such a gallery of voices, just spanning, gender, age. I mean, you get these men, going to work at the plant, and then you've got, the aspiring Shad Queen, homecoming marchers. It's just, it's all here. And what strikes me with the reading, I love this thing you do. It's right up there with a good catalog list, and one, and I guess it's in the first story because it's Becky, but there's this great description about her makeup, and I had to write it down. It works better at night or in the dark at bars a few towns over. And I thought, I mean, how wonderfully ambiguous is that? I mean, we think we know when it works better at night, and then it's just getting a little darker in terms of life. And you do that a lot. We think we're reading something simple, and it's not simple at all.
That's funny. I feel like I could say the same about your work as well, right? It's just these stories of everyday people trying to make their way through their lives, and then there's always this trap door that the reader stumbles on somehow. And I keep thinking about hieroglyphics as a trope. Obviously, it's the title of your novel, but the way the different characters communicate with each other, like the stenographer having her secret language, the list of things that her shopping list that inadvertently makes the court record, and she's wondering, what does this say about her? And I keep thinking about the train wreck and all the objects that are strewn over, like, what do the objects say about what we value? And I keep thinking about that when I read your work, because they're so centered around objects. And I'm wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about the way that works in your fiction, or maybe, yeah.
Well, and in hieroglyphics, there are two real life events that are in the background, and one is the Coconut Grove fire in Boston, and the other is this train wreck that happened in my native county in North Carolina. So that was in 43, and the Coconut Grove fire in 42, and in both cases, it was a time when things were being sent by telegraph mainly, and and people having to go long stretches of time with no news of their loved ones and not knowing the outcome. So it's like time just completely put on pause. And much of the identification of people in both situations came down to the kind of small details of our lives we don't think about, a dry cleaning tag in a coat, or the name brand of a shoe, or, some kind of token in a pocket, or a tie clip, on and on and on. And people were identified that way, ticket stubs in wallets. And, so all the little things that in life we often wind up in the trash can, or in that, I probably have many containers around me right now that I just stick little pieces of paper in all day long, and we don't think anything of it. But in the aftermath of something that cataclysmic and life-changing, they become clues and details that define someone. And I think as writers, certainly you also are drawn to these very specific details. The guy who cuts his ponytail every 7 years, not only is it biblical, but just the idea that you would see these little ponytails hanging, just something that quirky. How do you forget that person, or the sort of wild tattoo that catches your eye, or even the description of that copper wire hair you just described in the child. Those little details, I think, make such a difference.
Yeah, it's funny. I keep thinking about the way storytelling emerges, and it's usually through, you usually hear something. There's usually a little bit of observation. There's usually, and it's this compiling of different ideas, the string gathering, right? That we all, as writers, endeavor to gather and to knit into something that feels tangible. And I'm I keep thinking about how does it even happen? Like in the, rereading my work, reading your work, I was just like, how do we make these things happen? I'm wondering about, I'm thinking about how detailed some of you have all these advertisements from that era, from the 40s, and some of it, I'm wondering where you get your not just ideas from, but the authenticity of a place and of a time. This idea of being homesick and time sick. You really embody an era, and a voice from voices from a particular era. And I'm wondering, how does that happen? How do you do that? Because it's just really blows me away when I
I think a lot of times, we talk a lot about how if the emotional truth of the story is on the page, everything else around it can be reshaped, remodeled. And so once I had, the voices or a sense of it, then I did do a lot of research, looking things up of the place, the music, the clothing, all of those parts of it. But I was going to ask you a very similar question, because yours is so rich with nature, and I just wondered if did this knowledge just come in because it's part of your everyday world? The fish sounds, the different kinds of beetles, plants, a whole notion of evolution. Again and again, these people are sort of claiming their roots. And even though there's so much overlap because they're walking in the same areas and some are related to others or referred. But at the end, I'm just so struck by the individuality. They're like just individual seeds or individual, the fish that this guy, forgive me, I'm not going to remember his name, but he's so wonderful. He's listening to all these nature sounds and explaining. I loved him. I love that story.
Yeah, he is inspired by somebody that I actually met who is a researcher at East Carolina University. And
Wow, wow, wow.
they actually go out and listen to fish and their mating rituals. And I was working at the news bureau there, and I had to write a story on their research. And I was like, this is such an interesting body of knowledge. And so a little bit was gleaned from having conversations with an actual scientist who knew about the way fish appeal to other fish in a sexual way, which is so bizarre. And and what I loved about that was that the character, who's completely fictional, was struggling with how to connect in a romantic way with people who, he had a woman who was right in front of him who was clearly interested, and he didn't know how to convey that. And so this idea of the natural world telling him all this information that he could know, that he knew cerebrally, but that information never made it to his heart. He was never able to actually say, this is something that I can act on and have for myself. And
Yeah, because she's bringing the bees. She's bringing bees.
Right. She brings him the bees, and and they have this big conversation about gardening, and she's terrified, and there's all these bees that live in his kitchen, and I mean, there's just, it all feels a little preposterous, but I heard a story about some bees who, like, someone left the door open, the bees moved into the kitchen, and he was able to kind of eventually get them out into their proper place. But bee swarms happen all the time. So
It was just this wonderful parallel, between the two. And speaking of details of little belongings and all, one of my very favorite stories, and forgive me because I'm gonna blank here on title, the one where the father leaves on Christmas Eve.
oh, yeah, the
And
ship branch.
we learn, what's the title?
The ship branch.
Oh gosh, I love that story so much. And I don't want to spoil because it's a wonderful surprise. And it's one of those stories, what appeals to me so much. We were talking about Barry Hannah earlier. It is one of those stories that I keep feeling like I want to laugh out loud, but at the same time, the pain of it all just stops you. So you do this beautiful job of having us perched there between those two worlds. And there again, I think that's the story you mentioned, mistletoe.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
so there's so much about what's in the trees and what's surrounding.
It's funny because that whole, like, operation of the mistletoe is a complete, like, fabrication of my imagination, because I know from having lived in Eastern Carolina that their trees are just full of mistletoe, and every November I'm like, I could retire off of this tree alone if I could somehow get up there and get this mistletoe down and put red ribbons and sell for $5 a piece. Like, I would make a killing. And so, like, I don't know that I'll actually be able to do that myself, but I was able to allow my characters to kind of live vicariously through my own, likely unrealized ambition. And as I was moving through and doing a little bit of research on mistletoe, Wikipedia offered up the gift of the German translation of the word, and I was like, okay, that's just too
Yeah.
good not to bring in, to not to fold in. And so yeah, I think I think it starts a little bit with like something you hear or see or feel or are curious about, and then like you were saying, like you dive in and you go in and you do the research and you create, you find the magazines, you look up whatever you need to look up online or go to the library and allow that world to feel grounded in truth and to feel grounded in the objects and what a person might think and the catchphrases they might like say, or the types of jokes they might share with each other, as a way of if you're going to read something, you want it to make sense in a way that feels logical, but you also, as a reader, I think, want to be surprised about what happens within the world that you're creating. So the world's
Absolutely.
familiar and peculiar, or even a little bit magical, all at once.
I didn't know that there was a real Mewborn crossroads. I
Yeah,
mean, that is that I kept meaning to look it up, and I thought, oh no, that's just too good. I mean, because it conjures newborn kittens. I mean, it's just
yeah.
this kind of innocent, struggling sounding kind of place, and it's just a wonderful name.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, it's a little bit south of Pitt County, and it may not even show. It's just literally a crossing. Like Frog Level is a crossing, or
Right.
it's just a crossing. So
Wow.
it's not even a town. But the name of it, for some reason, just stayed with me. And there's a lot of really good contenders. I mean, Kanita, like, which is spelt like cone toe, but I mean, there's just so many cool names that I could have picked. But I don't know, Mewborn stayed with me as it was a placeholder name, and then I was like, actually, this is the name of the town. This is where we're going. So yeah,
And
Swan Quarter.
yeah,
Yes.
somebody just said Swan Quarter. Yeah, and is there a shad queen?
Oh yeah. Oh my
Uh,
gosh. Yeah, there's collared queens, shad queens. Oh, what's the town? Lisa Beth, can you help me? The town south of Aden begins with a P, maybe. But anyway, yeah, there's an actual shad queen, and maybe not. Okay. But yeah, no, there is an actual shad queen, and there was one year where the Shad Queen had made headlines, and I was very interested in her happenings. And
oh, that's
not,
interesting.
literally, that whole story is just completely fabricated. But I can remember going to the Collard Festival in Aden, where I had lived for a while, and seeing a redhead girl in a tiara who was in a sash and hot tight jeans, like falling, stumbling down on the fairway. So that little image kind of stayed with me. And I just saw Grifton. Yes, that is correct. The Grifton Shad Queen. That's yeah. Thank you.
I just love it. I love it. The downtown parade. We all know it, but they're unique in its own way.
Yep.
These are just great observations. I mean, it's what is that saying? Be one of those on whom nothing is lost. I mean, clearly nothing is lost on either of you. So we have one really good question, and I'm not sure who it's from. I think maybe Miriam Kamita. She said, you both have a particular way of storytelling. Can you both talk about this sort of indirection?
Indirection?
I mean, the way I'm reading this, I would say something that I always think about. And I read an essay by Donald Barthelme some years ago, where he says when it comes to storytelling, you want to have the reader's mind or your mind move in an unanticipated direction. And so it's something I've always keep in the back of my mind where if I'm telling a story, I think about what could happen and I think about the possibilities of, what happens next. And so within the realm of what's possible, I guess. And so I mean, maybe that could help. I don't know. Like I always try to think about the conclusion of a story that feels logical but isn't the one that you were predicting, and just never. I don't know. I always tell my writing students, I was like, no Disney endings. So unfortunately, there's no happy endings in my stories either. I try to practice what I preach. So
No, I always say there's nothing greater than to come to the end of a story and sort of gasp in surprise, and in that same moment to recognize that all the logical steps led us there. And so I think the trick is having both on the page, and it's very hard to do if there's just one thing happening. And Max, you heard me say this a million times. I mean, it's a juggling act, throwing one ball up and down is no feat, and you add the second one, it's a little better, but it's still pretty predictable. You get the third one in there. And so, sometimes it's the voice, it's the setting, it's something we know that happened long ago in the past, or it's something on the cusp, the person is moving toward it, but you have enough places to move on the board. It's like that trick, where they move the cups around and sort of which cup is the ball or the coin under. And so I'm always aware of those needing those different parts. And I think that is where the attention to whether it's history or nature, something in the physical world or in their memories that you keep coming back to. It's just a good, it's almost like a formula or equation.
That's a really great way. That's a really great way to look at it. So then the question becomes, as the juggling, of course, is an incredible challenge. There's this balancing that has to be achieved without forecasting too broadly the conclusion of the story or the novel. The question then, and this is something that someone texted me, is what was the biggest challenge you faced, excuse me, in characterization? Which character was hardest for you to access, either in a story or Jill in hieroglyphics?
Well, for me, it would be Lil's husband, Frank, who is an archaeology professor. And anytime that I have a character who I know is a lot smarter than I am and knows tons of things I don't know, that's a challenge. You have to find just enough to put on the page and hope that he sounds believable, in his profession and with his knowledge. So that was a challenge, and also just an older man's voice, somebody who's pretty compartmentalized, not wanting to give up a whole lot of information, withholding. His wife is somebody who's interested in looking at everything, flipping it over and examining. I also have a child in there, and the child's mother is at wit's end. Well, those are two of my favorite places to be on the page. Actually, I have three favorite places on the page: dementia, early childhood, and the person who's kind of losing it, because what they all have in common is freedom of the tongue. The filter, either the filter has not developed, that frontal lobe is wide open, or it has rotted over the years and there's no filter. I mean, I love having characters with no filter. And so, you know, dealing with whether it's old age or early childhood is a lot of fun.
Yeah. I'd say for me, I don't know, I'm thinking about the character Cheryl, who shows up in one of the sections, and she has some limited cognitive deficiencies that you come to understand, but she never says it outright. So I think for me, writing her character, I had felt like I had to be very mindful of being thinking about where does Cheryl's intelligence come from, and how can I bring that to the fore, and how can I use the logic that she applies to her world, to her sister, to her mother, who I does have some dementia and a hoarding problem. Like home holding the fort, right? Nobody else is helping her, and how does she manage this, and how does she get the attention of her sister? And so for me, that was a really challenging character to write, but also very rewarding, because I think I was able to kind of inhabit her mindset and worldview a little bit in a way that I'm not sure a lot of writers are able to tap into, or maybe some are, but I haven't come across them. So that definitely Shirley, and the kind of vacuum section, like distance, and there's one other, I think, azimuth and altitude. Yeah. So.
So there's this is something that I got to thinking about, because a while ago Erica made a playlist for Large-Hearted Boy, which I'd forgotten all about Large-Hearted Boy. I really love that. And so I was wandering through Erica's playlist because it brought back so many, in my case, memories of Erica singing with Doghouse Band, and then of course Jill singing with Doghouse Band, putting one of her stories to music. And in Erica's interview, she said something about the song "One's on the Way," which I think of as like an Erica signature piece. I'm sorry, Erica, it's just so great.
In, but that's okay. Yeah. No.
Well, that there are a lot of them actually, but at the end of the conversation that you had with Large-Hearted Boy about this particular song, you said that you could pick any Loretta Lynn song, or Dolly Parton, or any Lou Harris, and find at its heart a person trying to make peace with someone they're supposed to love. And I read that line over and over again, and I thought, well, that's a lot of what's going on in both Jill's book and in your stories. So if you could just both talk about that idea of, the intersection of love and trying to make peace with something.
Whew, yeah.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I think at the core, someone asked me, well, what are your stories about? It's like, well, they're mostly like family stories, right? It's set in the South, but these are people who are really concerned about people who they're supposed to love, right? People who like, I'm a daughter, I'm supposed to love my parents, and I'm supposed to get along with everyone, and yet that's not the reality. And so how do spouses get along and not get along, and how does that, what does that look like in particular? And so I think in microcosm, I mean, everyone has some story that of a relationship that failed, or that you keep showing up to, and it doesn't work out, or maybe a relationship you show up to does work out, and that's wonderful. But I think when it comes to short stories and to writing people's stories, you want to get into those particulars. You want to get into the inner contours of like what didn't happen or what did happen, as a way of accessing, I think what Jill was saying earlier about an essential truth about a relationship with somebody. And so I don't know. I think that's kind of what's going on, like, you know, this idea of like somebody you are supposed to love, and how does that manifest for these particular characters? I don't know.
And I think we're all so defined by those early relationships in life, both the positive attachments as well as the loss, and so the loss of love, whether it's, because someone has died or because someone has left, you spin a different story as to what caused the loss, but at the end of the day, it is a kind of grief. And I don't know, I always think, we probably spend the first 13 years of life packing a big steamer trunk and attaching it to our backs, and then you're going to spend forever more unpacking it and trying to make sense of it. And so in the case of my novel, the two older characters they basically found each other because they had both experienced the early painful loss of a parent. So the loss of that security, and really are working through even in old age with how to compensate for that loss. So, I mean, I once heard somebody say, love, loss, what else is there? And, I mean, there was that great little book, Eileen Beckerman's Love, Loss, and What I Wore, that then went on Broadway. And, I mean, that pretty much says it all. You remember what you were wearing when this happened or that. But I think that's the pulse, right? Those hurts. And in the same way, what we hold up as the highest.
Yeah, that's fabulous. And Jill, I think you and Erica have really nailed it. For fiction writers and nonfiction, really what we need to get at is, not only are we juggling, whatever, the balls, tennis balls, whatever we're throwing in the air, but we're also dealing with these ideas of love and loss and grief, and the idea that we spend our first few years packing a steamer trunk so we can get the hell out of wherever we are, and then the rest of our lives we're unpacking it, because really that was our hope.
Take it with you.
You take it with you. It goes with you. So I will end this conversation by saying, to quote Jill, love, loss, what else is there? There's buying books, folks. Please support our writers. Buy Erica's book, buy Jill's book, which is now out in paperback. And thank you for coming to a Birch Bark event. We're thrilled to have had you here, and come back for more. We'll be offering more. Thank you so much, and good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Kat
thanks
and
to
Max.
everybody for coming. Thanks, Kat and Max. Erica, wonderful to see
So
you.
nice. Yeah.
Just terrific.
I hope to see you all in person very, very
Oh,
soon.
won't that be wonderful?
Yeah.
Can't wait.
Soon, very soon.